back for some more unsolicited marriage advice, where I basically just debunk some of the most common myths about marriage that you hear. So today we are going to be talking about how your spouse's number one job is actually not to make you happy. I know. Hot take. So what is your spouse's job? Well, I scanned through the Bible and I wrote down a bunch of different roles, I guess, or jobs that husbands and wives, according to the Bible, are supposed to fulfill. I'm just going to rapid fire through all of them. I'm not going to discuss them in a ton of detail just because you can open a Bible and read the context for yourself. This video would be ages long if I did that for every single verse. But for husbands, in Ephesians 5, verses 25 through 28, it talks about loving your wives, giving your life up, or protecting your family and your wives, even if that means your life. In 1 Peter 3, verse 7, it says to give honor to your wives. In Malachi 2:16, it says that husbands are to be faithful and loyal. In Colossians 3:13 and 14, it says that you should forgive one another, and that in that verse it means everyone, but obviously that includes your spouse. So you should be forgiving towards your spouse. In 1 Corinthians 13:4 and 5, it says, be patient, be humble, be kind. Back in 1 Corinthians 11:3, it says that husbands should be the leader of the family as well as the leader in the marriage. In 1 Timothy 5:8, it talks about how husbands are providers. In Philippians 2:7, it says, serve your wife. So husbands are also servants to their wives as well as their family. And then finally going back to 1 Corinthians, again, there's a lot of good stuff in 1 Corinthians 7:3, it talks about fulfilling your wife's sexual needs. Now on the flip side, wives also have responsibilities. In Genesis 2:8, it talks about how wives are helpers to their husbands. I quote that verse all the time when it comes to my husband and I's relationship. In 1 Timothy 5:14, it talks about bearing children. In Ephesians 5:22, it talks about submission to your husband and respect to your husband. In Titus 2:4 and 5, it talks about loving their husbands, their children, and being wise and pure. In 1 Corinthians 7:13 through 16, it talks about making your husbands and children holy. It also mentions that in 1 Peter, and that's mainly due to our faith and obedience to the Lord. Again, in 1 Corinthians 7:3, it talks about fulfilling your husband's sexual needs. And then in Exodus 20:14, it talks about being faithful. And so you'll notice that not in any of those verses and not anywhere in the Bible that I could find did it once say, husbands, you are to make your wives happy, or wives, you are to make your husbands happy. So why aren't we called to have our number one priority be making our spouse happy? Well, it's because happiness is an emotion. It's temporary and it's conditional. And like other emotions, there are a lot of things that go into how we feel at any particular moment. It doesn't say this in the Bible because I don't believe that this concept was sort of put together until many, many years later. But if you think that your spouse's number one job is to make you happy, or you think that your number one job is to make your spouse happy, you might be experiencing some codependency. According to Merriam-Webster, codependency is a psychological condition or relationship in which a person manifesting low self-esteem and a strong desire for approval has an unhealthy attachment to another. Now, from Psychology Today, a few signs that you might be in a codependent relationship is that, you have to walk on eggshells around your spouse or your significant other so you don't set them off. Maybe one person has all of the responsibilities. It's very one-sided. That same person might be constantly sacrificing their health, their time, their money, their energy, their well-being in order to provide for this dependent spouse. Your need to fix your spouse or your significant other becomes controlling. You might have feelings of resentment or frustration because of your responsibility over your spouse or significant other. And you might find that you're needing the other person or the other person's approval and compliments and even presents just to make you happy. Now, that all sounds really bad, but my husband and I were once in a codependent relationship, and so I'm not saying that if you're in a codependent relationship that, it's the end-all be-all and that you're not going to survive. When Keller and I first met, it was January of 2020, and so very shortly into our relationship, we were launched into quarantine together. And a lot of our friends left, and so he and I spent almost every day together. And when he left at the beginning of that summer for his internship in a different city, I was nannying this baby girl by myself. And that's pretty much almost exclusively who I spent my time with, other than my twin brother who I was living with. And I found myself desperately unhappy that summer. And there was a lot going on. Like, there was a pandemic going on. There were family tensions going on. I missed my boyfriend. I just had a lot of negative spiritual warfare going on because I wasn't attending church anymore. And so that summer was just really hard for me. And I distinctly remember this phone call that I had with Keller where I was just beside myself upset, could not stop crying. And I don't even really remember what I was saying, but I remember he said to me, Haley, I can't be the only person that makes you happy. I can't be the only thing that makes you happy. And he was totally right. He was totally right. That conversation sent me down a road of sort of reinvigorating my faith and reinvigorating my desire to study the Bible and to pray and to have a relationship with Jesus. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so joy-filled now as a person. But I made the mistake of thinking that Keller's number one job as my then boyfriend was to make me happy. And guess what? Nobody, no person, no human in that moment, no matter how amazing, could have made me happy. This is the part where I tell you what I'm not saying so that no one misunderstands me. What I'm not saying is that your marriage shouldn't be happy or that you should stay, if you're in a dating relationship and you're not yet married. What I'm not saying is that you should stay in that relationship if you are unhappy and if the relationship is unhealthy. In my limited experience with marriage, when my husband does all these things, when he performs all of his marriage duties, when he has all of these characteristics in our interactions and just, in him as a man, those all make me happy. When he is loving me, when he's protecting me, when he's honoring me, when he's faithful and loyal to me, when he's patient with me, and when he forgives me, when he serves me. And obviously in 1 Corinthians 7 there is a physical nature to marriage, and so when that takes place, that makes me happy as well. And not that I can read his mind, but we talk enough to where I know that when I perform my duties as a wife, it also makes him happy. And so while happiness should not be the number one goal in your marriage, it should most definitely be a side effect of all of these things that are listed out throughout the Bible. I think this misconception that your spouse's or your significant other's number one goal is to make you happy comes from this sort of social movement, the self-love movement that's really pervasive in our culture right now. And what they don't talk about is how there are so many good things that can temporarily make you unhappy. Your job might make you unhappy every once in a while. Keller's experienced that. My parents have experienced that. It doesn't mean that their job is bad. It doesn't mean that they should quit and, go on unemployment or whatever. Your kids can make you unhappy. It's a huge sacrifice, whether you are the mother who gives birth to them and you're sacrificing your physical body, or whether it's, your finances or your time. Kids can make you unhappy, but they're still good. School has made me unhappy, but it doesn't mean that it's bad. School is good, and I love it most of the time, but there are definitely moments where it makes me unhappy. If I went around cutting my losses. Every time something made me feel unhappy, I would probably have no friends. I would probably have no relationship with any of my family members. I definitely would not be married. And I don't even know, I wouldn't be in school. I don't even know what kind of job I would have. To be honest, I don't know if there's a job in this world that I would always 100% of the time be happy with. You know, going back to 1 Corinthians 7, that chapter has a passage in it that talks about how our attention is divided here on earth. Which, you know, it's kind of unavoidable if you are married. Yes, our attention should be first and foremost on God. Yes, our reverence and our respect and our love and our praise should first and foremost be on God. But we are also called to be X, Y, and Z for our spouse and towards our spouse, which means that inevitably our attention will be divided here on earth, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I think this passage brings up a good point, a good reminder that above all, and especially above happiness, your responsibility as a spouse should be to continuously point them to God and prepare them for the day that they will stand in front of the throne at the gates of heaven, awaiting their admission into that kingdom forever. And my goal as a spouse for Keller is to continuously pray for him. We said this in our vows, to pray for him, to pray with him. If he is continuously growing into the man that God called him to be, then I think I'm doing my job as a wife. So there you have it, folks. I hope you learned something. I hope that you may have gotten some encouragement from this, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.